So we continue with our relationship discussions as they come up according to Malika's list.
Mm.
So on your list, you have your list?
Yes, I have my list.
Okay, so fire up. What's
Okay,
next?
so we're talking about conflict resolutions.
Conflict resolution.
Okay,
Somewhat
so
important.
should I quickly read them?
Fire up. What have
Okay,
you got? What are we doing?
So keys to mastering conflict resolution.
Okay.
Okay, and this is from your post on Instagram. That's
Okay.
we're gonna kind of add a bit of nuance.
Okay.
I really liked it. So 1, state your purpose clearly. 2, listen without assuming. 3, ask questions before jumping to conclusions. 4, focus on the issue, not the person. 5, find common ground. 6, be willing to compromise. 7, show appreciation for effort. So I'm guessing this is not real order. This is listing what we should be paying attention to, but we will just kind of
I would say to you that, again, those are factors that are important to
Okay.
consider. So it isn't a sequence. It doesn't look
That's
like
exactly.
sequential. No.
Yes.
And again, yes, it's stuff that I've said that I didn't put in that particular order. Thankfully, I've got somebody who takes care of that for me. So I haven't seen it before, but it is taken from stuff that I've said before. So I was listening to the list as you were going through it. I'm like, those are pretty good points.
Okay, so should we
Okay.
go from 1 to 7?
Pick a point.
All right, let's go. State your
With what intention?
conflict resolution, right?
So,
So mastering the skills.
You're going to like the
key-
first point because I'm saying to you, so what's the point here?
the clarify. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, to
so we
explain the
clarify.
keys and key steps that you should at
Okay,
least keep
so-
actions or
So we're going to discuss
things to-
7 key facets really
Exactly.
to conflict resolution. And the first one says when we have the conversation, state your
purpose
purpose.
clear.
Oh, funny enough, I was saying that's what we're going to have. So absolutely, I would say to you that in any communication, so before it's even become a conflict, we try and prevent the conflict. But if we know what to expect in the conversation, which is going to come from, let me share with you my hope for the outcome. So here's the purpose, which might even include, I'd like you to know my intention. I'd like you to know that ahead of the detail that we're actually going to go ahead and discuss. There's no question in my mind that the best communication begins with a clarification of the purpose.
I wonder we could give example. What's a bad way to do that? Is there a bad way to do that?
Often,
Can you recognize a bad way?
I would say they're bad ways of communicating, which often result in conflict. What I would say is if we try to go in with, as an example, to say what I was trying to bring about as we started the conversation, the purpose that we have for having this conversation is to make sure that we've got the facets and we can use them effectively in order to reduce or manage conflict in relationships. So if I come to you and I say, listen, you mentioned yesterday that you were waiting before you sent out, that slide combination to the people who were part of the workshop. You were waiting for me to have improved the slides. Well, in essence, right, or sent you updated slides or whatever it was. So I think at some point you and I were looking at things. I was saying along the lines of, in the next presentation, I definitely want to improve the slides.
Yes.
Right. And definitely, I think we can agree on that. The content, I think, was solid. The slides were iffy. The delivery,
bit
right,
of polishing
in terms
needed.
of polishing, but that's part of the process, right?
Exactly.
So the idea was I'm waiting for some information back from the
Yes.
people who are participants, and you're waiting to send this before you give them something that, isn't quite what we had in mind. So in that particular situation, it could easily become, right, a matter of, hey, but you said. And I must be honest with you, when I read your message, I was super impressed, right? Because you killed any potential for, hey, but Ryan, you said this. You just said, okay, no problem. What are we doing going forward?
No, I said I misunderstood. I must have misunderstood something.
And again, here's the deal. Whether you did or you didn't, you were very kind in your message to basically say, I'm going to kill any room here for unpacking anything. That's certainly how I read it. I was like, very well done.
That was intention.
And
Yes.
it came across. I could see it. And I was like, I was impressed.
Because the point is still to deliver, which
and for sake
I
of
did.
efficiency,
They're going to come back to you,
and
all
again,
of them.
right? So at that point is I had cleaned up 3 things, which I had sent to you. And again, I could see the whole tone that came across in yours. We were not on the same page, not through any specific fault of yours or mine. It's in the, in the mix of on the go. And just the way you wrote that, I was like, I could see it was intentional, it was careful, it was without accusation. It was simply, hey, maybe I misunderstood, opens the door for,
Let me do that.
let me,
Yeah,
it
let me.
was really well handled. So again, in terms of what the purpose was we need to send this out to the people. And knowing that that's the purpose allowed you and me to basically avoid getting caught up in the trap of going on a rabbit trail or a sidetrack that would have ended up really taking time, energy, effort that was completely unnecessary. And again, so that would be an example. The purpose was clear. We need to get this to the
But
people.
this is actually quite a nice catch for something of innocent, but in life we can see this quite often. I just don't want to be the guilty party, right? I mean,
Well,
it's
I love what you're
quite
saying.
often. I just don't want to be the one blamed,
I
or
don't want to be the one blamed.
I
I don't
don't
want
want to
to
be
see
the
the one.
guilt. Yeah.
Yeah. So because we don't want to be the one blamed, because we don't want it to come across as though it was potentially our fault or our reason, we go off on a defense track as opposed to saying there's actually nothing to defend. You're not under attack. I'm not attacking you. I'm saying we need something done and I depend on you to do that. The purpose again is we need that sent out. You responded, okay, it hasn't been sent out, right? Because of this and that, but that's out the way. I'll send it now. It actually is a really good example. And we haven't even discussed it. It didn't even
Yes.
require further discussion in many respects because
And you didn't even follow up
I didn't.
because I did it
Yeah,
actually.
absolutely. But the purpose was clear. We were on the same page. The process was a little disjointed because we're so busy with other things. But the response to, hey, has this been done, was so well handled that it made it so easy that, again, even now it comes as a surprise that I even raise it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But
Yes.
it is a good
And
example.
it's funny. I mean, understanding in the moment what's a priority, yeah, what really should you focus on?
What a great point.
Yeah.
And that is the purpose. Number
Yes.
one, check.
Watch. Right. So, and I think that ties up quite nice to focus on the issue, not the person.
What
This
so important.
exactly what we just. So I would, if I focus on the person, I would discuss, well, yeah, that's not what you said, and then what I. But now I'm talking about issues, so it's important to send that. We should, it gives value, and it's going to be helpful, and it's a task, and and so it's the moment I focus on an issue. I mean, it completely changes the way the conversation goes because it's
100%.
not personal. I mean,
In
we
fact,
stick to what we are talking about. I do find that character attack quite quickly invades the conversation. So we
very,
can
very true.
rationalize ourselves quite well. So why we did, we give ourselves a lot of justification. But the character is always a problem with the other person.
$100%.
Sense of failure on your side. But I can explain endlessly why I did what I did.
And that's the point, and so can everybody else. In fact, I had a couple in this morning to discuss a very important subject, right? Where it turned into probably 70% of the conversation between the two of them were literally related to character assassinations,
Yes.
which
It's
basically
so painful
it
though.
was really painful. Here was your message. I must have misunderstood something then, right? I'll send them. I'll send this one and ask for the feedback. I gave the thumbs up,
Yes.
right? Acknowledged I've received, everything sorted, and we continued. That was the end of the
Yes, it
conversation. It
was
was a
two
matter of
things, two
um,
lines.
it was 2 minutes apart, done, job
Yes.
done, because there was no sense of I need to defend. I hope that you didn't need to
Mhm.
defend, and there was certainly no intention on mine to I need to prove that she didn't do the job. It was just a matter of we're in this together.
It
We
would
have
be,
a
yeah.
common goal, purpose, and yeah, we're not always going to be on the same page.
But I think value of relationship, I think you and I discussed, there's always a value of relationship and what you want to risk. Why would you
Absolutely.
ever risk something?
Over
So that
that.
if you're coming with that, it's interesting. If you're coming with that at the end you would never want to risk the relationship, then the focus is quite, you kind of reset very quickly, right? I mean, you can say, and
As
then you
to your
come
last point, I
as
think the last point was what?
uh,
The second last,
show
willing to
appreciation.
compromise, the
Ah,
second last point.
be willing to compromise.
In essence, that simply means that, as we said, it's not sequential
Yes.
necessarily. It simply means that I'm willing to say it doesn't have to be all my way. I'm willing to give something that might enable us to make progress and move on from here. So a compromise in that sort of situation is might be I don't want to go ahead and compromise the purpose by getting caught up in an attack. So I compromise possibly by saying, I'm not going to necessarily even go that particular route. It's not necessary. And we move on. That might not be a perfect example of compromise, but you get the point is that there are times when I'm willing to say it doesn't have to be all my way. I'm willing to give in order for it to work.
I think that discrimination of if you have I mean, integrity preserved. I think that quite often we feel porous. That ego feels porous. I
Hmm.
think I don't even know how to define that, but it sounded smart, doesn't it?
Well, it sounded very smart. I
Very
had no
smart. I
idea what you
was
said.
impressed. But um, saying sorry quite sometimes feel like it's gonna dismantle the house.
Hmm.
It feels like a huge loss. It's almost gives you in a state of vulnerability. And quite often, compromise also, it feels like a loss of something that preserves you. It really is.
Correct. Which is why, if we understand apology and compromise as not defeatist,
Yes,
what an important concept.
yes,
I apologize does not mean I've lost. Apologize means I recognize that I may have done something that hurt you. I might have done and said exactly what I wanted to do, exactly what I feel I needed to say. And it came across and it was hurtful. And I knew it would be. Well, stating my purpose that my intention is not to hurt, but this may be hurtful. And I'm going to try and present it as gently as possible. In essence, what one's looking at there again is there is an understanding and a willingness to say, I'm sorry, or to say, I'm compromising. That does not mean, again, I've lost. As soon as I feel it's something that I'm going to lose, I'm going to defend. And in all probability, I'm going to cause greater destruction than, you know, more destruction than were I willing to simply say, you know what, yeah, I apologize. Not
so
defeatist.
so in this couple that you mentioned, there
Yeah.
was, attack on a character,
It
right?
repeats it,
And giving very
unfortunately.
little grace and credit to the other person, right?
Very little.
So how do you bring back to this, to look at themselves and focus on what would help right now and how
Immediately,
helpful that this is? I mean, it sounds to me habitual way of
well,
handling things.
immediately the situation there is I know what the principle is. They are not going to resolve those particular issues. They are not going to, in that moment, resolve things to make everything easier going forward. The only thing that allows them to move forward, which they have to, is to find agreement on something, right? So what do? You bring them back and you say, what's the goal? What's the purpose?
Yes.
Do we agree on what the desired outcome is? If we can agree on what the desired outcome is, now we can try and find something that we can agree on in terms of process. We're not going to agree on everything because it's preference and it's, perspective. What can we agree on that's probably going to require some level of compromise because I don't think you're going to do it the way I would do it, which I think is the better way. Well, I feel exactly the same way. Well, we're stuck. We're at a stalemate. So I'm willing to say we come back to what the point of agreement is. Here's the goal. And we share that. We agree? Yes, we agree. Okay. How do we make our way towards that, bearing in mind the conflict that we have? Well, let's try not bring up the past issues. Let's try not bring up the character flaws as we see them from our perspective. Let's try and figure out, is there something, if I could take the emotion and the personality out of it, that would take us toward the goal? Yes, I think that could work. Oh, actually, I think that's quite a good idea. Well, why don't we try it?
So in this case, do they actually know how the other person is hurting? Do they understand how they're hurting each other? I'm now really curious because quite often that's the clarity part, right? State the purpose. Quite often there is no understanding. So, is it I feel lonely. I don't, I feel rejected. I feel sad. All of this. Remember the list I will show you? There's a lot of things to describe stuff. What,
Hmm.
you know, so do they understand what is causing actually the state they're in? Because obviously they're claim when you attack someone, that means you're causing harm, you're
Sure.
causing hurt, and you're the last person that I expect that from because I gave so much or I opened myself so much so What do they, when they assess, can they explain in the office? Do you give them a chance finally, you being a buffer where they have to listen and they have to be open? Does the person eventually understand what really is causing this hurt without focusing the other person? It's focusing on self.
There are times when that's exactly what I want to try and help understand so that the person is more, again, self aware and can manage themselves better. And there's times when I want the other person to understand why the other person is hurting the way they are so that there's empathy, right? So in that situation, you're trying to cultivate that in both an empathic or empathetic view of the other person. I can understand how tough that must be in their situation. I still don't like the way they're doing things, but it allows me to give them that little bit of room because I know how difficult it is. And that is something important that you do for the other person. But what you do for the person who is actually struggling and possibly um, hurt in a particular way and attacking, yes, there are times you want them to try and understand why is it that you would retaliate? What is it that was so painful to you or that inflicted such a wound on you? So all of that is in play, which is why I say this very often. If we're looking to solve anything, we rightly need to identify the problem and understand it. There are many times, even in the conversations that we have here, that we might say, "Oh, I identified that this particular word used in a conversation was inflammatory and created that response." Yeah, I identified what it was. Do I understand why that word was chosen? Was it intentional or unintentional? Because there's a different response there. If the word was chosen intentionally, then I'm going to deal with that particular situation differently to, well, that was unintentional. Intentional is, hey, you need to check and see what the goal is here. Unintentional is, hey, you can apologize and say that was not what I meant, and you can try again. There are two very different courses of action there. But what you realize is that with just about everything in life and relationship, there are multiple layers. So something can present itself almost the same way for many, many different reasons. And you used the term earlier, what are some of the nuances? Or these are all nuanced. These are all things that
Yes.
have very, very subtle components to them that can massively influence how one approaches them, how one resolves them, how one refines them. And that requires lots of understanding. And that's not always something that people who are in that situation are open to. So there are times when, again, I might not look to unpack any of those things in that moment, but say, let me pull you back to what's the goal. So it really depends on the individual. It really depends on the combination of people and the issues at hand and the time allowed. If we were 10 hours, I can say, well, everybody stand up and, cruise around, walk around, shake it off. Let's come back and instead of looking at this particular goal, we're now going to try and establish, why do we feel so badly? And we might turn our attention there before we move on. Well, unfortunately, sort of day to day life doesn't allow us the sort of time that we often would need to really unpack and unpick and dissect these things to the level that would give us the kind of clarity that we need to make significant and often rapid changes. So I think the fact that we sometimes don't have that time is a hindrance to the rate or the rate of improvement or the rate of progression towards a better sort of outcome, a better relationship, etc. It's complex. For all its simplicity, it becomes complicated because of the various facets that can influence so strongly.
So do they practice in the session, ask questions before jumping to conclusion?
The encouragement is always
Would
there.
you how would that play out? How does that really play out? Ask questions before. I mean, obviously I'm just
The
hoping to hear a bit
encouragement
more.
is when I'm listening in those kinds of situations, I can usually pick up very, very quickly how the things that are said, where they're coming from, and how they're going to be interpreted. So when before a person's about to, say something, I say, just hang on a second, you know, ask them what they meant by that, and almost act as the outside sort of prompt to the kinds of things we're trying to
So
develop as a
let's
skill.
play this out.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I say I'm angry,
Yes.
and I think anger gives a lot of sense of agency because sadness is not really a nice standpoint.
Hmm.
So I think people choose anger way early on. Um, and So I say, and it's corrective, obviously.
Correct. Yes,
It's a
it's corrective.
modulator. Yeah, it's very
It's
corrective. It's a
corrective.
massive SOS.
Yes.
But so I say, I'm, you're never home. You just don't care about this relationship. We don't do anything. So I'm fed up of this. Right.
Right. So in that situation, before the person comes along and says, "Well, that's not true," to say I'm never
Which,
home, etc., etc., etc. Now I'm defending the detail. You might stop and say, "Listen, does it come across as though?" And I'm going to assume in that particular one, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's the woman who might in that relationship be saying, "You're never home." In this, and
yeah, let's
anyway,
find
right.
out. Let's say
So that's what
that a
I'm saying.
female,
So from the female
female
side,
partner.
right, you're never home. So it might be in that situation that I might, before you answer that, do you hear that what she would actually like in all probability is that you were home more? Now, immediately, right, the idea is, okay, well, um, so I would say, is what you're trying to say right now an indication that you'd prefer him to be home more?
Actually, I wish if I was in the, if you probe me, I would like to be brave enough and say, I'm lonely.
Yes.
I miss
Yes.
you. I love you. And I would love more time with you. I hope and it saddens me that this is a problem that where I build up my anger because I feel that if you shared this,
Yes.
I love you. I would like to. If I was the
Yes.
person, why wouldn't you be with me? And this is where we never discuss. But the first thing I wish I said that you kind of allow me created the space
Yes.
is that
So let me play that out
how
for,
much I value it. I'm angry and I'm
yes.
asking not because I want your presence,
Yes. So let me show you
just for
exactly
the
what you've
sake of
just
you
said.
coming home. I mean, that's
Right.
not the
Exactly.
point.
It's not about, it's
That's
not
not
geography.
that's not the want
Right.
that I'm.
So the point is to state that exactly as we've just played it out now might be the way in which I would state, to which I would ask the question. I'm
Yeah,
saying
have you heard
this,
that part in
right?
that?
And at that point, be, you know what, I miss you. I really, really miss you. To which point I say, well, how do you respond to that? Usually the wall is down. By that stage,
Yes,
the person is actually
yes.
tearful and usually
Come
like
as you
come
are.
across and they will grab the hand and I'm so sorry. Because in many respects, the reason I'm not home is because of the kind of way in which you've just said to me, you never this, you never that. And I'm so tired after the day that I don't want that kind of bombardment. But if I knew that that was the real issue, guess what? I actually want to be home. We're together because of a reason. And as soon as we can unpack that again and we can say, I allow the things we do have in common, and I allow the things, not me allowing them, but we in that situation, allow our minds to go back to our genuine common ground and our common goal, immediately those things transcend the words spoken that reflect again, I'm missing you, I'm lonely. So 100%, if we can go ahead and when we say something, just push pause and say, let's try and understand where that came from, what it is
Exactly.
implying.
Exactly.
You'll find that the responses are often remarkable, to be honest with you. And it's so rewarding because all of a sudden it's like there's a breath of fresh air, and the person I'm combating is the person I actually want to walk with. And oftentimes we'll have people walk out with a huge relief. And it simply came from listen to what they are trying to communicate rather than the words that they use to tell you that you are inadequate and not delivering the way in which you should.
There's lots to speak, to unpack that, but I'm not gonna kind of go with that. It's this common sentence: "I give you everything,"
Yeah,
and everything is such inflammatory. It's awful. It's a triggering word on another level. Um, Everything, never, ever, always. It's just
it's collective and it's efficient.
yeah, but
It's just not helpful.
it's exclamation. It's more
Yeah, it's
exclamation.
emphasizing the point.
How often this is, but it's and in itself, the person quite often can just get there and discuss, well, that's not true. And
Yeah,
then
and
so
that
you
opens the
get,
door for
yeah, and
that.
the detail in itself kidnaps the whole conversation. But I give you everything and there's absolutely no appreciation, but what more do you want from me?
Exactly. Now, do you hear that? The moment a person's in that state,
Okay.
what more do you want from me?
So now you
Oof.
just realize there was very rarely discussion of what do I really now either both of them don't. really examine what do they really want.
Oftentimes they're afraid to say it because they think of the response they're going to get.
Exactly, because in a state of vulnerability now the pain can truly be because let's
Ah.
say you meet my honesty with unfavorable honesty, right? I mean, these
I
things, and
opened
we are
myself up.
designed to avoid this. This pain, it's like can life
Yeah,
change. You can
absolutely.
create less of trust for future. I mean, it does have a negative feelings of such are far more remembered, obviously, and they're charged. And so I think the creating a safe space, it's quite hard, but also not knowing after such a conflict, not knowing if the other person will meet you
Yeah. Again, that's that
with vulnerability
uncertainty.
on the other side.
And oftentimes what we do is we assume they won't, which
This
is
is why
why we
anger
build the
comes
wall.
so quickly
Yeah.
and to protect my own
We build the
self.
wall to protect, right?
Yeah,
But
of
as we
course.
build the wall to protect, so we shut out. And when there's walls built both sides, we end up in those phases I described in the workshop that there are natural progressions of a decline in a relationship. They're heated, they're cold,
Yes.
they're off, and they're broken. So, what happens is when we build the wall of defense, protection, we've had the wall and we see all the things lying around. Now we build the wall. That is where we have the distance, we have the cold, we have the switch off. Now, in that state, right? Is when we are left making many assumptions. And to come out from behind the wall is to expose ourselves in a way that, again, is tremendously vulnerable. And that, in and of itself, is a risk, which is why I say, in many respects, to go ahead and try and facilitate good relationships, you are going to have to run the risk. You're going to have to risk. You're going to have to risk giving the relationship an opportunity, and that means oftentimes being vulnerable and saying, this is what I would like. And if the person says no, instead of taking it personally and having it all fall down, then you say, then we've got a big problem and
Yeah,
we've got
yeah.
more to discuss. So it ends up becoming not a dead end or not something that has me retreat again. It's like, well, if that's the case, then we're in bigger trouble than I
Yeah,
thought.
because you're finally discussing the problem you should be discussing.
Correct.
Now it's the solution you should be seriously
Correct.
because
Right.
it's funny because we understand this intuitively when we transfer to another field. So, you go to a
Good
doctor,
point.
you hope that he's gonna get the right diagnosis because that depends the treatment. But then, in relationship, we just go avoid the
Mm.
whole thing because we just don't want to hear it, or we don't know if we're gonna handle what we hear, or
Let's leave that there because what you just said now, something came to mind that I actually think is a very, very good thing to discuss on the back of what you've just said. And it's going to be along these lines. It's almost as if the moment a person says it, then it's cast in stone. So
yes.
I'm not going to say it. I know what you're thinking. You don't know what I'm thinking. You said it. Now you said it. Now it's all done. So let's actually pick up on that concept in the next because it relates to what we're
Yeah, we're
doing now.
doing the series here.
We're doing a whole series. Cool. So, in fact, I'll say, I asked you in the last one to take something away that could be application. There's no question in my mind, and I know I say that a lot because I've thought about these things a
Nothing
lot,
for 20 something
right?
years.
So, there's no question in my mind that with any attempt to prevent conflict or manage conflict, always bring yourself back to what's the purpose. Stating that clearly, stating it obviously is very helpful in reducing the natural tendency. Why? Because if we share the purpose, as I said before, we have agreement. And agreement is what we need to find, not on the detail necessarily, but on the things that matter in order for us to move forward together.
Yeah, that's a skill as well, finding a purpose, no?
I'll save for another chat.